Greetings, everybody. Welcome to a rainy Southern Virginia fall day. In this video, I'm going to be revisiting Minidlna. It's a media server application. My previous video on the subject was actually more than a year, almost a year and a half ago. It was some time ago, but anyway, I'm revisiting it mainly because a couple of people asked me to, so yeah, it seemed like a good thing to do. Anyway, the DLNA in Minidlna stands for the Digital Living Network Alliance. Got to get that right. And it provides a certification standard for network streaming of multimedia to various devices like smart TVs, consoles, programs, other things. This also includes what's called the Universal Plug and Play, or UPnP standard. So the Minidlna is software that's based on this standard and this certification, and it meets the various requirements. So it's the server side, and you're going to need a client side device or application to use with it. So effectively running it off of your server makes your server a small multimedia, or media server, basically, yeah. But again, you need a client that understands Minidlna, or actually the DLNA standard. I do want to note before we get too far along here that I looked at the Minidlna project page, and I haven't seen any updates for a couple of years, so I'm not really clear on what the current status of the project is, but not letting that stop me. So in the previous video, which I should link somewhere, I guess, I discussed the basics of installing a Minidlna on a Linux machine, making it a small media server for DLNA clients. I need to clarify that one a little bit, I guess. This time around, though, I'm going to be glossing over a lot of the basic installation stuff and looking at two things more specifically. Like I said, I covered the basic stuff in another video. First thing I want to look at is the basic file structure of Minidlna on your computer. And the second thing I want to look at is the configuration of Minidlna. This includes both command line options and configuration file options. While absolutely not necessary, I do recommend you look at my previous video, because like I said, I'm going to gloss over a lot of the installation stuff here, which that video actually covers. There's also another video you may or may not want to look at. It's actually not that long ago. I think it was a couple weeks ago, maybe something like that. But I talked about using Minidlna as a test when I was comparing a VirtualBox to Virt Manager. But the only reason that might be of interest is some reasons why you might have Minidlna not working properly. So that's another video if you want to watch. It's out there, so I'll link that one too. So another note, I'm using a virtual machine running Debian 13 Trixie with no GUI. In fact, the only thing beyond the basic Debian install here is OpenSSH and the Minidlna software. I bring this up mainly because we all know Linux distributions like to do things their own way. So what I'm presenting here, if you're using the apt installer, you'll probably be okay, but if not, you're probably going to have to do a little bit of interpolation on your own to make it apply to whatever you're using. I am assuming that if the Minidlna package hadn't installed it correctly, so yeah, just have to take a look at that. One final comment before we get to the meat of the subject. Debian 13 uses System D. It's the default Minidlna. The Debian apt package has some options for System 5. Since I'm using a default Debian, we'll be using systemd here. It's more common, but it's just something to be aware of when we're talking about things, okay? All right, let's talk a little bit about the Minidlna file structure and what's installed on your computer. So starting from the root directory, you're going to see well, you're not going to see unless you go looking for it, but there's an etc initd Minidlna file. It's in the etc directory and the initd directory under etc, and the file is called Minidlna. This is what starts everything, but there's also a user lib systemd system minidlna.service, which also starts everything. And the difference between these two, well, basically, and I mentioned this earlier, one's system5, the other's systemd. However, both source another package, etc default minidlna, which has some more settings in it. So we'll be taking a quick look at all these files, with the exception of, well, with either the Minidlna or the minidlna.service, you're probably not going to be messing with any of these files too much. So we'll be taking a look at them. Additionally, so I'm using Debian, so I'll get a minidlna.service because I'm using systemd, but it could be the other one, but it'll be calling when it runs and uses a default minidlna, then it's going to call the user sbin minidlnad, which is the actual program file. Now said program file is going to access the etc minidlna.config file, which is something we're going to be talking about later. So those are the basic files installed. There's an additional one installed at etc log rotate.d minidlna, and I'm probably not going to look at this file, but you can if you want. It's basically for log rotation. Basically, if you have Minidlna set for logging, this will monitor the size of the log, zip it up after it reaches a certain point, give it a extension like 01, 02. I'll have to run Minidlna for a while and see how it actually handles logging, and then at some point it's going to delete the logs, the oldest ones, saving the newest ones. But yeah, that one's located in etc log rotate.d. So a couple of other directories we need to be aware of: variable var var catch minidlna. This is where your minidlna database and your art folders are going to reside. If you have artwork with your media collection, those are both going to reside in that folder. Interestingly, that folder is going to need to have read-write access for minidlna, which is going to be a user created by the install, which we're going to talk about here in a bit. Then, of course, there's variable var log minidlna, where the log files are going to be stored. So if you're having problems and you want to look at the log files, you've enabled logging, that's where you'll look for. And finally, there's a media dir, and I'm not giving you a specific directory. Minidlna sets itself up with a home directory. I think it's /variable/lib/minidlna. But this is where you're going to put your media, but you can put it anywhere you want. We're going to set up in our configuration file to use a different folder that frankly makes more sense to me, but we'll get into that. So before getting too far along here, we need to actually talk about the client-server model. Or Minidlna is a server providing a service, and your console, smart TV, program, whatever is out there, is a DLNA client, probably using Universal Plug-and-Play protocol. Generally speaking, you're probably going to use using Minidlna on your local network, and you're hopefully not streaming it to the internet. I'm not going to get into security issues with that. I just recommend using it on your local network. So what happens is periodically the Minidlna server is going to advertise itself on port 1900, and at that point your client is going to pick up the advertisement and recognize that it's there. It's going to acknowledge on port 1900, and then they're going to start a data exchange. Minidlna, and I'm assuming the client, they're going to exchange XML files, data files, various data, so each knows what they're dealing with. And when we go into the configuration, we're going to talk about a lot of the data that goes to this XML file. And generally with the clients I've tested, a lot of it's not used. It's still there, but not used. but they're going to talk back and forth, exchanging data. So yeah, you're going to need port 1900 if you have a firewall open. Also 8200, which is the default HTTP port that Minidlna uses. But we'll get into that a little more as we talk about the configuration, won't we? Okay, let's jump over the terminal, and we're going to go in, and I want to look at the etc password file. We're going to use the grep to filter it. We're using cat to display it on the screen and grep to filter it. We're looking for the Minidlna user. So cat etc password pipe bar grep Minidlna, and we get the line and we see the username Minidlna. It's user 101, which is a system user. If you look at our user number, it's 1000, which is the first of the user numbers, not system user numbers. Group number 104, that's also system. The Minidlna server is a comment added to this. It's a home page, and we mentioned this directly before. I mentioned this directory just a few minutes ago, variable lib Minidlna. And we notice that we have a user sbin no login shell, so you cannot log in as Minidlna. That's a security thing, and that's on purpose. So if we do a cat etc group, and then grep Minidlna, we can see our Minidlna, and we're at group 104. One thing you could possibly do, you might want to do, is add yourself to the Minidlna group. I'll list the commands at the bottom of the screen to do that. It's basically change user command at the TACR for a recursive. Anyways, I'll list the command at the bottom. I'm not really going to cover it here. If we look at the Minidlna folder in variable lib, we see that it belongs to root. However, it is readable and writable by everyone, as is the RX at the end of the string at the beginning of the line. Same with the group, and it's only writable by root. Depending on how you're using Minidlna, you might want to modify this somewhat. So next, let's take a look at the actual Minidlna program itself, which is in user sbin, and we'll use the grep Minidlna to signal it out. Oh, ls, we need to add the AL so we can actually see some of the options. Again, you can see this folder is owned by root, and I think we just covered this in the last section, did we? Maybe. But we're actually looking at the Minidlna program itself here. So no, we didn't cover this. This is sbin, yeah. So here we're looking at the actual Minidlna program. It's actually owned by root, which is as it should be because it's being run by a service, whether it's system D or system 5, doesn't matter. So that's the actual program itself, which is run by when we start our service. All right. The next thing we want to look at is our service. So we're going to go to ls.al user lib systemd system, and we're going to grep Minidlna. Again, another file owned by root. You would need to sudo or use root permissions if you want to edit this one. You'll see some of the text in some of the files saying what you can, or I guess what you should and shouldn't edit. But yeah, that's actually listed in the remarks in the files, and we'll see that here shortly. So we're going to use the less text display, and we're going to look at what's in this file. Again, user lib systemd system minidlna.service. And this is a basic systemd file for starting a service. You can see in here we specified user Minidlna and group Minidlna for configuration file at etc minidlna.config, various other options. Again, we're really not going to go into this in detail here. I just want you to be aware that it's here. Next file we want to look at is the etc default Minidlna. Again, owned by root. You need sudo permissions or root access to edit this file. This one I want to take a look at. I've mentioned comments inside the file before. One of the ones you're going to see here, warning, this file is used for compatibility with System 5 only or System V, init only. If you are using System D, please override minidlna.service unit instead of modifying these variables. So basically, these variables are listed here for System 5, but if you're going to set them, you need to set them in minidlna.service. Don't try setting them here to something different than defaults. It's not a very long file, but yeah, that's one thing I wanted to point out here. And again, we basically define the configuration file, the users, the groups, and various other options. Just for the heck of it, and because it is in the Minidlna archive, the package you download, let's look at the etc and the Minidlna, which is the System 5 startup. Again, root program, you're going to need root access sudo to edit this file. And this one's a little bit longer, but this is the System 5 startup. And again, a lot of the same options are specified here as specified in the other files. So this one actually tells you that the defaults could be overwritten by etc default Minidlna or whatever file you're using for that one. Since it uses name, it's, again, not going to get into how this file actually works. I just want to note these files because when you edit things, you'll actually see the same thing in the config file. It'll refer you back to one of these files. So you need to know, depending on which system you're using, System D or System 5, which files you need to edit to change some of the parameters. Let's just take a quick look at variable logs. Again, ls tach.al. One thing I want to note here, this program, your log rotate program, is actually owned by Minidlna, or I should say the directory is. Let's look at also remember we mentioned the variable catch directory. That's also owned by Minidlna because Minidlna needs to be able to read and write to that folder. And if we try to actually look in the variable catch Minidlna folder, we're not Minidlna. Even that's the owner of the folder. We're not it. We're not root. So we need to do a sudo to actually look at what's inside that folder. And you can see your art cache and your database inside that folder there. So yeah. They say Minidlna is the owner, is the group. If we added ourselves to the Minidlna group, then we could probably access this, but as it is, we need sudo or root access, basically. Next, we want to look at the minidlna.config file, which is in etc, and we list it the same way with the AL options, and we can see it's owned by root. So you're going to need sudo to edit this file or root access. And if we take a quick look inside, it's a pretty long file, at least longer than the other ones. We're actually going to take a look at this one in a little more detail in a few minutes after we talk about some command line options, okay? So to explore the command line options, we want to use the man application. Look at the man page for Minidlna. On some distros, man pages aren't installed by default. It's been a while since I've used Arch, but I seem to recall I had to install that one separately. On most APT ones, it will be installed by default. But we're going to go ahead and open it up and look at the, we get some information, a description, and then we get a lot of options. So. And again, it'll tell you here that most of these options can be set in the configuration file, -D for debug mode. You really don't want to use this if you're running it as a daemon, because it can generate a lot of data. tach config file, we can specify the location of the config file. Obviously, you probably can't specify this one in the actual config file itself, but if you're using something different than the etc minidlna.config, you need to specify that when you launch it with the tach option. tach shows help and exits. Pretty simple. It basically gives you the command structure and a brief overview of some of the commands. The tach option interface. This really only applies if you have more than one interface and you only want Minidlna to use that one interface, then you list an interface with the TechI option, and that will be the only interface it uses. If you don't have this, it will be available on all network interfaces. The do not create playlist, this really depends on your what this does on your DLNA client that you're using. None of my clients actually use this option, but I guess some do. But again, it depends on the client you're using whether you can actually create a Minidlna playlist or not. None of my clients support this, so this option is kind of pointless for me. Model number, remember we talked about them exchanging data in XML format. This is one of those things. You can create your own model number for your Minidlna server. We'll see serial number and stuff like that a little later. Model name. -P is a PID file name. When you run this program, this is what's going to be created in the run folder. Again, you can modify the name of this, but I just go with the default. But yeah, this is the actual PID file. TAC-P, the port to listen on. 8200 by default. Minidlna does use 1900, but you can't change that. This port is for the HTTP interface. If you use a capital R when you launch Minidlna, it will rescan the media files. Quick warning, if you're running this from a daemon, you need to shut that daemon down and then restart the program using the -R, or it will not rescan the media files, or if it does, it'll mess them up. So if you're going to use this option, you got to make sure Minidlna is not running via the daemon before you run this. Capital R does a full rescan. It deletes the database and does a full rescan. The small r is what they call non-destructive. It basically looks for changes and adds those to the database, so it's generally quicker. Stay in the foreground. Yeah, this means when you log into your server, you'll see the Minidlna running in the terminal. I haven't really found a use for this because I generally go to systemd and see what the journal entries are for it. But for some troubleshooting, you might want to, if you need to troubleshoot this, you might want to use a capital S option. The small s is a serial number. Again, that's XML data that gets passed. The notify interval. If you have your Minidlna server running and you turn on your smart device and it doesn't detect Minidlna, well, by default, it broadcasts on port 1900 every 895 seconds. So just wait, basically. Or you can give it a shorter time duration, say 60 seconds. User, again, specifies which user we should run as. The default's Minidlna instead of root. You can use either the username or the numerical UID. TAC-V option, show program version and exit, and then TAC-V, verbose. This is something you're going to use in troubleshooting. It will write out to the terminal everything. In fact, you might want to use this with the capital S option if you're having troubles. And in TAC-W, URL sets presentation URL default HTTP address. I have not been able to find a good use for this. I mean, if you're running Windows, it supposedly shows up when you open the remote connection, but it doesn't show up in Windows Media Player. It doesn't show up in any of the smart devices I tested. So yeah, I'm not real sure there is an actual use for this. Like I say, if you're using Windows and you do properties, you can see the presentation URL, but again, I don't really see a use for it. Okay, let's take a look at the big one, the actual configuration file. You got some comments above. One thing they do note is if something's commented out in this file and there's a value there, that's the default value. They also talk about specifying username and UID to run on Debian command line options. From etc default Minidlna will override this. You remember we looked at default Minidlna. Since we're using systemd, then Minidlna.service overrides this. That's the main reason, one of the main reasons to be aware of the file structure, so you know where to modify things. Again, user Minidlna, it'll be the same as the This is the one that's set up by default when you install it. Then our next big entry is our path to the various music, video, or picture directories. There's some instructions here. Basically, you have some capital letter designations, A for audio, P for picture, V for video. As I said, the default is a variable libs minidlna, but I moved mine to SRV, or services directory. It just makes more sense to me, but this is a personal preference on your preference. You could leave them in this folder or you could move them somewhere else. Just remember that if you're using the variable lib minidlna, by default, it's root access only. So if you want to write to it, sudo, these folders I set up, you can send things over as minidlna if you're in the group. That way it was easy for me to not, for my regular user account, to load these up. But again, personal preference, up to you. Like I said, I joined the group for minidlna so I could write to these folders. Merge media dirs. This is an interesting one. Doesn't do a lot for music, video, pictures. However, if you've got multiple music directories or multiple video directories or multiple picture directories, it'll all merge them under one folder. The only thing I've noticed about this one when I've tried it out is that it seems to increase the amount of time it takes to scan before minidlna actually becomes active. So other than that, it doesn't really affect the program. So if you can live with a longer scan time when it starts up and you just want to have, say, all your movies in one folder and they're in different folders, you can use this option. I'm not using it because I've just got one video directory or one music directory or one pictures directory. So again, personal preference here. Next, where is our database located? And again, we look at the default location, variable cache minidlna. Again, up to you, personal preference. You want it there, you want it someplace else. I do know people who use this and they change the home directory from minidlna to the home folder and move the stuff there. But again, personal preference. Same with the log files. By standard in Linux, logs go in the variable logs folder, so I leave mine there. You can move them if you want here. Again, personal preference. I'm saying that a lot, but a lot of this is personal preference. Next entry we have to worry about is what are we logging? And this can sound a little complicated, and it just sounds a little complicated, but it's not that hard. So first thing we have is the types of things we're logging, and that's like artwork, databases, HTTP errors, and iNotify errors, things like that. And then we have the level, fatal, error, warn, info, debug, with debug being the lowest level. You notice the command here is set up log level equals, you can see a general, or everything basically to warn level. If you want to add another entry to this line, you just put a comma after warn, or you could just create a new line because you can also have multiple lines. To me, it'd make more sense and be more readable if you use multiple lines. If you wanted to, say, have a fatal for general and, I don't know, HTTP or iNotify, and just warn for, say, like artwork. You can set that up. And now we have the root container, and this is another interesting one, and you probably saw it mentioned in the comments up above, but basically we have several different root containers. The default is the period, which is your standard container. B is browse, and what this actually means is if you're using a minidlna client that is audio only and it tells minidlna it's audio only, then it will only get the audio directories or the music folders, and if you got it set to browse, or the video folders. If it's video only, you get the idea. I generally leave it to dot. One thing here, these specify object IDs. Yeah, that's you can find these if you dig into the source code. They're from some abandoned Microsoft project. Was it PlayforSure, I think is what it was called. But I had dug them out, and you'll see, I'll flash them up here on the screen what the ones are that the minidlna recognizes. But again, and I'm assuming it's a Microsoft client, recognizes these values, you can use them. I don't know if anybody else would ever recognize them. Maybe a media player, Microsoft Media Player would be my thought. Again, I just leave it at the dot. Network interface. Again, this is the same as the command line option. You can specify here multiple interfaces, a single interface. If you leave it blank, then it basically, DNLA works on every interface. Again, these are comma separated. And we've got our port number here, and this is not the 1900 universal plug and play port. This is the HTTP port we're using, and we've got it set to 8200 by default. You can change that. Your presentation URL we talked about. Again, I haven't really found a good use for this. Friendly name. This one does show up on pretty much any player or client I've used, and this is part of the XML data exchange, and you can set the name. I forget what the default value is, but it's pretty long, so I just set it to a name, and you call it anything you want. Serial number, model name, model number, these are, again, part of that XML information exchange. I really haven't found a use for serial, model number, or model name, as they don't show up on any of the devices. Again, I had not tried the widest range of universal plug-and-play devices, Minidlna or DLNA compatible devices, so they might actually show up on other devices, but they don't show up on my smart TV. They don't show up in VLC or any of the Android apps I tried. iNotify is a whole video unto itself, but it's basically a way to notify a program that changes have been made to a directory it monitors. One of the errors you might get with the Minidlna is you don't have iNotify set to a high enough value. Again, that's a whole separate video, but if you want Minidlna while it's running to monitor its directories and recognize changes, and you need to set this value to yes. If you just want to update the directories every time you start it, you can go with, like I say, the small r, capital R in the command line. And then we have the names for various types of artwork. Cover, album art, small, folder, thumbnail. These are all standard names for various artwork that could be associated with some of your media. So these are the ones that Minidlna recognizes. You can actually add additional ones if you want, / separated. Strict DLNA equals no. I tried this. It didn't really seem to make a lot of difference on what I was doing. I mean, the claim here is that it downscales JPEG images, but I didn't really see a speed difference or any effect at all. So do with this one as you want. TiVo, I haven't seen a TiVo player in ages, so I'm skipping over these. I don't know if TiVo is even still around. Notify interval. Remember we talked about if your client doesn't recognize Minidlna, you should recognize that 895 second value. You can shorten that here. And again, this is your socket run. It's basically your internet, your network socket, and the tag on the file it's running under. I suggest leaving this one alone. In theory, sort criteria, if your client sends a sort, this will override any of your client's sort requests. I couldn't really figure out a reason to use this unless you had directories or something you didn't want people looking in. But again, none of my clients really offered the option to do a sort, so I didn't really get to test this out. Max connections, your Minidlna clients do a number of connections. For example, VLC is interesting. It won't do a connection for music files, but it does one connection for each video you start. Again, this is a maximum number. Actually, one of the Android clients did 2 or 3 connections right off the bat. So it depends on your client. And again, you can increase this number here if you have problems. I could see that being an issue if you have multiple people using multiple clients and the clients open a number of connections by default. Again, but 50 is a pretty large number. So, but yeah, if you can't connect, you might try increasing your max connections. Wide links. This one is, I'm not using it right now, but if I actually set up a server, I'll probably use it because I'll have my media folders being somewhere outside of the Minidlna folders I set up, and I will have system links pointing to them. And that's what this lets you do if you change it to yes, is have a link in your Minidlna folder pointing to another folder. You do this like if you were using other media players, media systems. Say if you're sharing folders with Minidlna and let's say Plex, for example, they might be in separate locations from the Minidlna folder, and you'd need to link to them, and this option lets you do that. Enable subtitles. Actually, none of my movies actually have subtitles because I don't bother recording them. I'm assuming this turns them on. Again, none of my stuff actually has subtitles, so this really has no effect for me. I'm not sure about this enable thumbnails equals no, because I've got it set to no and I'm getting thumbnails for my videos. They're kind of squashed and square, but again, haven't really tried this. I'm guessing if you have a thumbnail artwork, this would affect that, which I don't have. Again, width, quality, stuff like that. Oh, and thumbnails have a film strip. This is if you have multiple thumbnails for a video. They will be displayed one frame after another like a film strip. So yeah, this is for stuff in your art folder, I guess, because I have embedded media. In my video files, I've embedded art, just shows up. So this would be for separate artwork, and if you had multiple pieces of artwork, they would be displayed in series, one after the other. Okay, I think we're winding down here. Just one final thing before we depart the subject. On a system D, system control, restart Minidlna, it says no such file or directory, because remember this is all owned by root, and if you make changes to these files, you'll want to restart Minidlna. I mean, you could reboot. I'm just bringing this up for system D. I don't even recall, I used to use system 5. I don't recall the methodology there, but there is a methodology without rebooting. So if I use the sudo command, then I can just restart it, and it'll pick up all the changes. If you can't do this, you can just reboot. It should pick up all the changes. Okay, that was a lot of technical stuff, I guess, or configuration stuff, or whatever you want to call it. But that's pretty much everything you need to know about Minidlna. Most of the problems I've seen with it are either permissions or, like, say, ownership or things like that. I've seen some firewall problems. Again, the two ports, 8200 and 1900, need to be open. Well, 8200 if you leave it as this default. When I did the VM video, I was having trouble setting up a bridge. That was an issue from the VM. If you can't use a NAT, you got to use bridge if you're running this from a VM. Mainly because NAT puts it behind a router, and bridge lets you look at it directly. But again, this is basically a Minidlna second part, more detailed information about configuration. So I'm hoping this is a help to somebody. I know a couple people requested this. As always, like this video if you like it. Subscribe if you want, and leave a comment. Until next time.